What's up, everyone? Welcome into episode number 499, where I cannot believe we are almost to 500 episodes, almost halfway to 1,000. It's crazy. There's been a lot of stuff to talk about. There will be a lot of stuff to talk about in this episode, as well as we got the Tigers, unfortunately, falling a little bit short in the ALDS against the Seattle Mariners. I'll talk about that. I'll also talk about the press conference with Scott Harris and AJ Hinch. And then after that, we'll get a little bit of Red Wing talk as well. They're 2-1 on the year, having 4 wins out of the last 4 attempts against the Toronto Maple Leafs. So you absolutely love to see that. I'll talk about that, what happened in those games, how they've looked so far, and how Cam Talbot was truly the player of the game in the last matchup against the Toronto Maple Leafs. But before I go into obviously a little bit more about the Red Wings, let's talk about the ALDS. It was a very competitive series. It was the same game that the Tigers fell out last year. They lost to the Guardians in Game 5. You had Tariq Skubal going in that game. You had Tariq Skubal going in this game. And Tariq Skubal was absolutely fantastic in this game. Only gave up 1 run, went 6 innings, I believe 13 strikeouts in this one. And it truly was a pitcher's dream, especially for the fans. Like, if people really want to be on the end of their couch, just waiting for someone to score a run, just waiting in extra innings to see who would win this game, it had everyone's attention. Everyone was talking about it. Like, you had opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to score. And you could say the same thing with the Tigers. You could say the same thing with the Mariners until they walked out in the extra innings. Like, this was that close and that competitive a game, and this is just how well this game was pitched, because Tariq Skubal, like I mentioned, he was absolutely fantastic in this game. He truly gave it his all. Really, truly started out in the first inning throwing like almost 100 miles per hour. You could really tell that this was a game that he wanted to get correct, because last year against the Guardians, it wasn't the type of game that he would want. He gave up a big home run. He did not do that whatsoever in this game. This was ace-level stuff from Tariq Skubal, and this is the Tariq Skubal we have been seeing for the last couple of years. Like, this is the type of pitcher you want going Game 5. Now, with that being said, when it's 2-1 and the Mariners end up tying in the 7th, when they end up taking Tariq Skubal and Kyle Finnegan into the game, there's a little bit of frustration, because you could see that Tariq Skubal wasn't at 100 pitches yet. There's a real possibility he could go in the 7th, and if he didn't go in the 7th, then who knows? Like, he didn't go in the 7th. Like, if he did go in the 7th, you have Kyle Finnegan in the 8th, you have Will Vest in the 9th, there's a real possibility we could be talking about how they're playing the Toronto Blue Jays. Right now, the Seattle Mariners are 2-0 up against the Blue Jays. There's a ton of momentum coming off of this series, which is something that I fully didn't expect, especially when you use so many pitchers in this game. But it was just the epitome of what playoff baseball should be. Now, it also did really continue to highlight, and a big reason for the Tigers losing this series and losing this game is the issues that they have been having going into playoff baseball, is that they weren't able to get runners across when they were in position. The Tigers did that multiple times, especially in extras. I believe it was maybe the 12th inning, 11th or 12th inning, maybe the 13th, where the Tigers had a guy on second and third, 1 out, and they were able to get across. Now, you have to give credit to the third baseman. Javi Baez ended up hitting a dribbler right over there, ended up getting the runner at home. Can't really do very much about that, but you truly want to get a little bit better of a play appearance, maybe a little bit of harder hit, lift the ball. They obviously don't get that. Then you have the Mariners come in, just go off on Tommy Kahnle, which I think anyone going into that matchup kind of really knew that was going to probably truly happen. Tommy Kahnle just wasn't getting it done. And you have to give a ton of credit, though, before kind of going into Tommy Kahnle a little bit. He just wasn't good towards the end. He just wasn't good in this game. But because you use so many pitchers, you had to go to Tommy Kahnle. You had Jack Flaherty out for a few innings, which he didn't look great, but he did work some of his way out of innings. You had Kyler Montero. Didn't necessarily look the greatest, but he worked his way out of innings. Like, the Tigers had so many opportunities in this game that when they had a chance to truly break it open, or at least get a run to give them the lead, you kind of knew the game was over when they did it. And that was obviously a big talking point going into the press conference, was the inability for this team to get the big hit when the big hit needed to happen. And that was one of the biggest frustrations. Not only that, but the ability for this team to strike out over and over and over, and the inability for this team to hit breaking balls. When the team was at the best, especially at the beginning of the season, they were very selective when it came to pitching, when it came to hitting. They were very selective, and they took swings at pitches that they could hit, that they knew that they were strongest at. The issue came is when one team started figuring out that, hey, this team can't hit breaking balls. Like, if you looked at just the pitch selection in the last game, the Mariners for a long time was just throwing breaking ball after breaking ball after breaking ball after breaking ball, and the Tigers could do absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. And it's one of the most frustrating things because there is a little bit of talent there. But it truly does bring up the question, I think a lot of people truly realize this, is that you have guys here that can be star-level guys. With that being said, though, they did not step up when it came time to be there. The last game, the only truly guy that you can give a little bit of credit to, or maybe not talk bad about, is Kerry Carpenter. Kerry Carpenter was absolutely fantastic. He's the reason why the Tigers were even in that game. And then you have Dylan Dingler. Dylan Dingler, I thought defensively was great. I thought he got a few key hits. Like, those two are really the only ones out of everyone that, when it comes to hitting-wise, does not deserve any critiques because they came to play. But the guys in the main part of the lineup, Spencer Torkelson, Riley Green, Gleyber Torres, I know Parker Meadows extremely struggled. You also have a guy in Colt Keith that struggled in this game. They struggled all postseason. And when it came time for a big hit to come, when it came time to have a pinch hitter, AJ Hinch did not make that decision. And do I think AJ Hinch lost the Tigers this game? I think that's an interesting question to ask because do I think he pulled Tariq Skubal out a little early? Yes. Do I think Tariq Skubal gave everything he could in those 6 innings? Yes. So that's why I don't think you can necessarily completely blame AJ Hinch for this loss because I know a lot of people were really frustrated with when he pulled out Tariq Skubal. But when you give everything you can in a game and you have nothing left in the tank, it's not going to go well when you put him back out there. Now, do I think he probably had a little bit more left to go? Probably. But, he gave it his all. But you can at least maybe use a pinch hitter, maybe a pinch runner. I know this Tigers team didn't really get a ton of runners on base, but when Parker Meadows was basically an automatic out at this point, you could at least use something. I know that AJ Hinch is a very much of a matchup-based decision maker. And that's worked consistently every single place he has been. And it's been great for the Tigers. It's not always going to work out, but it's a huge part of his success. And that's a reason why in the press conference, it was announced that his contract was extended. And it rightfully deserves to be because he's one of the best managers in the MLB. And I don't think it's really close. And there was a lot more conversation that was had not only on that in this press conference, but they talked about the season. Scott Harris mentioned that, hey, the beginning of the season was great, but he understands the teams and the fans' frustrations. And he talked a little bit about that and talked a little bit about the importance of having guys in the lineup that can hit for contact that doesn't strike out. And there's a huge quote that Riley Green said that I do truly wonder if this was a little bit of a hint to him or maybe a hint to a couple of these players that had strikeout issues, is that at one point Riley Green basically said, no one cares about strikeouts. Well, guess what? Scott Harris cares about strikeouts. He also cares about success. And if you look at just the definition of success heading into the season, the beginning part when they had the best record in baseball was a success. Was this whole season a success? Absolutely not. I don't think you can say this whole season was a success for the Tigers. I think you could argue that it wasn't necessarily a failure, but like it didn't reach to where you thought it was going to be. Now, obviously, with the beginning of the season, Scott Harris did mention of like, what if this was reversed? What if they struggled right out of the gate and they got hot and they made it into the playoffs? Yeah, you can say that, but you can't change what happened. And I think that's the biggest issue people have with this press conference that Scott Harris had out of many issues. I think some people had, not many, but I think some people had issues, especially with the way he approached Tree Schoolball's question, all that kind of stuff. But you cannot reverse what happened in this season. You can't say that. You lost the division. Now, you did get to the ALDS. Great. But you didn't get past it. And the reason why you didn't get past it was reasons from last year, was reasons we saw towards the end of this year. It's reasons that need to be addressed. And I think one of those main big factors of addressing that is getting guys that can get and have better contact. I think that's going to be something that Scott Harris is going to address. Something else that Scott Harris is going to have to address is obviously the Tree Schoolball situation. He's going into the last year of control. And Scott Harris was asked about that. Basically said he's not going to talk about that, or at least not give kind of like a quote, because he's not a free agent at this point. And there was, I believe, an article, I don't know exactly who wrote it, but I believe basically someone said that he believes, and he basically told AJ Hinch that he's going to give, and the money's going to be there for if Tree Schoolball wants to be back. That is obviously a good sign. But when you have a agent, Scott Boras, that is someone that basically has their free agents go into free agency, not signing extensions, things can get really interesting. And that's my biggest concern about this whole thing, is that when it comes to free agency, the Tigers need to make a decent offer that is very, very competitive. They need to give Tree Schoolball money. Now, will they be able to give him the most money out of all the market teams? Maybe. Probably not. Which is why there's a little bit of a discussion that is being had right now about, do you try to trade Tree Schoolball? And I feel like that's a really interesting discussion to have. Now, there's one side of it is that if you trade Tree Schoolball, basically what you're telling your fan base is that you don't necessarily want to win right now. And I think in this press conference, you could really tell that Scott Harris is going to be smart about this thing, is that he knows that this is becoming his team. And he talked about the guys that were in the AA, McGonigal. You also have a guy in Rashuna. You also have a guy in Max Clark. They're going to be guys that have contributed. He mentioned that. They're going to be guys that are going to be helping this team out next year. But it's about continuing to build off of what you're making. And I feel like when you have an opportunity to not only sign Tree Schoolball in free agency, you do it. But if you don't know if you can, you have to listen to trade offers. And that is one of the biggest and most frustrating parts of this, is that you can see both sides of it. And you could see how the trade deadline, especially in the season, got fans pretty upset. But to Scott Harris's credit, he did address this in the press conference. He basically said that, hey, some of the guys that we were linked to, we would have to either give up a big prospect for, which is probably a Max Clark, McGonigal, a Brushino, or they're going to have to give up a guy that contributed on this postseason roster, which a lot of people were hinting that it was going to be most likely Troy Melton that you'd have to give up for Suarez. And you can say Suarez maybe hasn't had the best postseason so far. Melton has been great so far. He was great in the postseason. He's going to be a guy that I think is going to be very impactful for the Tigers going forward. but it's about trying to get this fan base bought back in. And you can see when the Tigers are good that this fan base shows up. And it's really going to be interesting to see how Scott Harris, how Chris Ilitch, and how AJ Hinch addresses this offseason. Because you need bats. You need pitchers. There's a real opportunity here to go do that. And you have a couple of guys that can be back that could be impactful for you. And I think this press conference opened a lot of people's eyes. I think it was a pretty good press conference, to be completely honest with you. I think Scott Harris said a lot of the things he should have said. And I think you're starting to see a little bit more of how Scott Harris approaches things without completely coming out and saying so. Like, he's going to be a guy that is going to give politically correct answers. That's exactly what he did, but at least he gave a little bit more insight into his process without going into the full-on process, which I think is going to be really helpful for fans to kind of understand why he made those moves. I think fans are going to be a little bit more acceptable of that, but there's still obviously the frustration, especially for the way the Tigers season ended. But yeah, that's really going to be probably it for the Tigers for quite a while until like a trade or like free agency comes, stuff like that. So that'll be kind of the review of the Tigers season. But before I wrap up the episode, obviously have to talk about the Red Wings. Red Wings so far are having a pretty good start to the season. They are 2-1 right now in 3 games. They end up losing their game against the Montreal Canadiens 5-1 to open the season. Obviously, not the best start to have at the beginning of the season, but you rattle off 2 straight wins against the Toronto Maple Leafs, which is absolutely huge. Not only because you don't like Toronto, right? Like, it's really that close. There's a rivalry there, I think you can say. But they're also in the Atlantic as well. And that's going to be really, really important for the Red Wings in the future. Now, obviously, it's really early on. They have 4 points right now out of 6 possibility points. Like, there's a lot to go forward. But that performance for the Toronto Maple Leafs in Game 2, great performance. This team came out fast, and you really, truly have to give credit to Dylan Larkin. He obviously scored a goal. He's basically almost guaranteed to at least get 1 goal against the Toronto Maple Leafs. It seems like he truly has the Maple Leafs number, which is kind of funny, to be completely honest with you. But 63 win, and then the biggest win so far, and probably the best win, even though this is probably the worst performance that they had this year, was a 3-2 win yesterday. Like, a great win. The Maple Leafs outperformed the Red Wings. I believe the shots were like 40-15. Cam Talbot was absolutely spectacular in this game. Like, he is a reason why the Red Wings won this game. Like, that is so just it and that. Like, there's no argument whatsoever. Now, Lucas Raymond did have an upper body injury in this game. That's definitely going to have to be something to keep an eye on for. Hopefully it's not long-term. Hopefully he's going to be good, because if it's long-term, we could have a full-on discussion of, is this season completely over? Because guess what? Lucas Raymond is that important to this team. If I had to guess, probably going to not be there for the Panthers game. Panthers, one of the best teams in the NHL, if not the best team. Obviously, back-to-back Stanley Cups, stuff like that. So that's definitely going to be very difficult to win anyways. But what a great goal from Mason Appleby to give the Red Wings the win with about 40 seconds left. Former MSU hockey player. Just a great one-time shot. You absolutely love to see, especially when the Red Wings were up 2-0, and the Maple Leafs end up scoring 2 goals in the third period. And it really looked like this game was going to be headed for overtime, which was absolutely guaranteeing the Red Wings at least a point. But then when you have a rebound, Mason Applegate just one-times it, puts it in the back of the net. What an absolutely huge 2 points for the Red Wings, especially against a in-league opponent, a team that you've beat 4 consecutive times at this point. And even though it's early, you are seeing signs that, hey, maybe they'll be okay. And I think defensively they're still not great. I think you also have to give credit to Emmett Finney as well. I think he's been performing decently well. Axel Padalika, not necessarily his greatest game, but he's going to continue to get better. there's a lot of young guys here, and you're starting to see the Yaizer plan come together. I think that's what fans are mostly excited about. There could be a real possibility I could talk about the Red Wings, and then they could lose the next 3 games. You never exactly know. But this Red Wings team right now is playing with a ton of heart. You have to give credit to the coach for that. They're going to continue to play hard. Dylan Larkin has to continue to stay healthy. Hopefully, Lucas Raymond will get healthy. Hopefully, Lucas Raymond will be completely fine. Hopefully, he won't miss long term, but you obviously hate when it comes to an upper body injury. But so far, so good for the Red Wings. Hopefully, they continue to do that. Obviously, they play the Panthers tomorrow. I'll definitely kind of keep an eye on that. Don't expect the Red Wings to win. If the Red Wings do win, though, that would make it really, really interesting. I think a lot of people would start buying in a little bit more on this team. Fully don't expect that to happen, though, just because of how good the Florida Panthers are. They have just been absolutely rolling everyone. This Florida Panthers team is going to be definitely probably the favorite for the Stanley Cup once again. But so far, 2-1 at the beginning of the year. Can't necessarily complain. Had probably 1 good performance, 2 bad performances. But when you have 2 bad performances and you have a goalie standing on his head in Cam Talbot, that's huge. And that is going to deserve you points. You're going to hopefully have John Gibson performing a little bit better. Hopefully this goalie duo will be better than they were last year. And if that is the case, maybe they'll steal a couple more points and maybe they'll find their way into the wild card. But that's a long ways away. We'll talk about the Red Wings throughout this season. Maybe not every single episode, but so far, so good. Love seeing these young guys play. Love seeing Dylan Larkin get involved. Mason Appleton, all those guys. Need to continue to get involved. Need to get these young guys to pick up a little bit, but they'll be completely fine at that point. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this episode. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, comment, all that kind of stuff. Obviously, Red Wing talk will continue to happen. Detroit Lions conversations will happen in episode 500. Probably talk about the Chiefs game, talk a little bit about the Tampa Bay game, all that kind of stuff. So Lions will be up next. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, and make sure to tune in to the next episode.